It has been said that average people want you to stay average. Welcome to the Breaking Average podcast, the podcast designed to challenge you to break the mold that average has on the world. Each episode offers insights directly from those who choose to break average every day. Now, for the latest insights, here are your hosts, Paul Gustafson and Rick Morris.
Welcome to the Breaking Average podcast. I'm Paul Gustafson, and I get to be with Rick Morris again this morning, but I'm in a different location. Rick, how you doing, man?
Doing good. I was just about to say, man, those are some new digs behind you.
Yeah, I am in a mountain cabin in Colorado, and it's the sun's just coming up. I'm trying to mask the light, but I'll try to send you a pic, and maybe you can throw that in there so people can see the view today. It's just beautiful. It's gorgeous. So if you ever get a chance to get out here, Rick, and be in the mountains with me, man, it would be awesome just to spend some time. We can break some average out here, man.
Yeah, I was supposed to be there, right? But just the way life works, wasn't able to make it. But next trip we'll be able to do that. I'd be excited to be out there.
We got a great topic today, Rick. You want to share with everybody what we're going to talk about?
We're going to talk about what we're doing right here. So as part of the how-to series, we talked about how do you write a book? We've talked about how do you speak? We talked about also how to deal with some of these different emotions. Of course, last week, got a chance to spend some time with the great Dan Pink and talk about regrets. So if you haven't heard that one, you want to go back and check that one out as well. But today we wanted to talk about how do you podcast? How do we do what we do? And what are the variations of podcasts? How does it work? If you're interested, how do you get set up? That's what we're going to talk all things podcast today, Paul.
Yep. So I think there's lots of areas. And when I think podcasts, so let's just kind of, let's talk about the menu, right? Podcasting. First of all, topic, what are you going to talk about? What's your theme going to be for a duration? Have a vision in mind, right? So we want to talk about vision. We want to talk about specific episodes and what you want to do. Talk about equipment. I think equipment's important. Talk about setup and lighting. Here you can see we got a kind of a lighting issue here on my end, don't we? Just a little bit, right? Because I got this backlight coming in, but sometimes you just got to use whatever place you're at to do what you're doing and find that routine. We're going to talk about schedule, all those things. So which of those, I know I'm missing a few because there's production and there's all sorts of stuff, and we're using Zoom. We've used lots of different audio tools to be able to capture and things like that. So we can talk about that. We've got some lessons learned, and we're still learning, guys. We don't have it down perfect. Yeah, but we're learning and we're getting better. And we want to encourage you, if you haven't done a podcast, hey, maybe it's time to do it right now. Start thinking about how you can roll out a podcast. All right. So Rick, where do you want to start?
Let's start with the why. I mean, again, why do it? And so I can talk about with R2, my company, the book was written to lead to stage, and I would sell from stage covertly, like not directly sell from stage, but I would paint pictures of the way things should work, the way things should operate. And then people would inevitably ask me, is that something I could come in and help them do in their organization? So when I first took the leap to podcast, my goal was to try to replicate what I was doing on stage through a podcast, share knowledge, give knowledge, help, the listener, but also start to build some trust to where if their, organization did want to hire me, then we could do that. So that became my original why, in terms of, podcasting when I started the work-life balance. And I did that for 5 years. And then the why of breaking average, I won't take your story, but, you and Mike had a particular vision for this podcast when it first started, and you guys brought me in. So why don't you talk about that? What was the why behind even starting this podcast and even how it evolved, Paul?
Yeah, for sure. Years ago, I did a podcast with Ken Tarr, which I loved. It was great. And it was called Leading the Millennials. And I'm passionate about that. I love the opportunity that we have, the platforms that are given to us to be able to speak life into people. And podcasting, I think, is one of the most, think of all the platforms, Rick, that are out there, right? So you could go to a speakers club like Toastmasters, Toastmasters is a phenomenal space, probably right in your neighborhood. And I encourage you, if you haven't done a Toastmasters, go do it. And that's a platform where you can get to share your values and your interests, but it's got a limited scope in terms of connection and ability to see. Writing a book, it's a great platform. But again, how do you get that message out? So podcasting, to me, I think provides a great medium to be able to share. And I've always had this desire, and I know people say it all the time. I want to add value to people. I really do. And I look at the ways that I can do it. And you and I getting up early on a Sunday morning and being able to share, that's a powerful way for me to add value to somebody else. Today on this podcast, I want to add value to somebody, multiple people, right? The truth of it is, when I do a podcast, I'm getting value out of it in real time. While I may have an intent to add value to somebody else, the truth of it is that when I go and learn and talk about a topic that I know I'm not 100% in, I'll learn something from, especially in these dialogues. It's great. So, but the why, and this all ties back to the why. Why? Because here we're talking about breaking average, and I want to help people. I want to add value, just as I said, and I want to help folks just move beyond the status quo. I mean, come on, let's go. Life is too short, too precious. There are opportunities every single day, and if we can just get on for a little bit, you and I, Rick, and share with somebody some things that we've gone through and some experiences, and talk to others that have gone through things like Dan Pink and what he wrote and all the research that he did, we get to share that, then we can help people break the status quo. So that's the why. And I love doing this, and I love the video format that we get to do it as well. So
we aren't selling stuff off the backside of this, right? So that you always have to look at the podcast. Is it trying to either determine value? Is it trying to determine sales? Those types of things. I did some research a couple of years ago. And in fact, you can go to, if you just Google my name and Google tips from a podcaster, my complete toolkit. I put a bunch of stuff out there when I was doing a lot of producing. But a lot of people, ask me why even do a podcast, or how do we even get after a podcast? And right now, and this is dated, this is probably a year and a half old, Paul, but in the last 2 years, over 850,000 podcasts were created. And that
Wow.
sounds like a lot. Like, how do you fight through that noise? And that's over 30 million podcast episodes. But the thing is that 70% of the population just in the United States, and that's probably even grown to 85, 90 through the pandemic, are aware of what a podcast is. And over half of them listen. Yeah. So you're looking at 250 million consumers of podcasts that listen to a podcast at least once a month, right? Yeah. If not every day. So there's tons of consumption going on when it comes to podcasts. So it's not, going. And the hard thing about a podcast, though, too, is while 850,000 podcasts have been created, that doesn't mean there's 850,000 active podcasts. So one of the hardest things to do when you're starting to track the media, the numbers, is you don't know when a podcast ends. Yeah. And so you don't know when a podcast is over. So that podcast now lives in infamy. Like, if you went on to iTunes right now and searched the work-life balance, all 5 years of my episodes are there. Now, I haven't recorded one in 2 years, but they're all there. So if somebody stumbles along and all of a sudden grabs it and starts to download, like, I still get download statistics on the show, but I haven't aired or created a new one in 2 years on that show. So that all those just kind of sit out there. So right now, the rough average is over 81% of podcasts created are no longer in production.
Wow.
If you think about that, right?
81%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you impute that, that means that's roughly about 200,000 podcasts are creating new content. Now, of course, you've got new, podcasts coming on every day as well. But when you've got, 300 million people listening to podcasts, and now you're down to 200,000 that are active, right? That audience, or that the production of it isn't as big and daunting as you would think.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of opportunity to get consumption.
So let's talk about why people may say, well, I want to do a podcast, but I don't know how, or they're just scared, right?
Sure.
Let's talk about the person that's apprehensive in doing it, because they'll have And I've had those excuses too, right? So Rick, I mean, let's face it, there are times where we're like, time, like I don't have enough time. Oh, of the production, who can do this? And you're doing all the production. Thank you. You're saving me a lot of time because you're doing the production on it, but you've mastered it. You have mastered it. And you weren't a master at the very beginning, I'm sure, but you figured out over time, experience breeds competency and all that. So, but let's talk about the person that's apprehensive. All right. And they're just afraid to do it. What's that first barrier that they're facing and how do they overcome it?
Yeah. So the biggest thing that I saw when I did research is a phenomenon called pod fade. And pod fade says that about the 7th episode, people start to fade out in terms of this. They also decide I'm going to do a podcast, but there's no strategy as in how you're going to release it, how many you're going to do, what that stuff is. So the number one thing I say is if you want to start a podcast, the first thing to do is think about seasons. Yep. So if you do a season with a season finale, then you always have that natural finish. Yeah. Because if you just stop midway, people don't know if you're done with the podcast, if you're not done, especially if you're informational like we are.
Yeah.
So what you do is say, okay, let's plan out 10 episodes for a season. And I'm just going to do one season. I'm going to commit to 10 episodes. I'm going to go ahead and plan out what those 10 episodes are. And I'm going to float it out there and see what happens. See if I like the process. Then if you decide that podcasting is not for you, you still have a great body of work that had a nice start and finish. And it didn't look like you quit. Yeah. Right. It didn't look like you just gave up on it. But it's a nice start. So that's the first thing I always say is plan out at least 10 episodes. And then if you're unable to come up with a solid 10 episodes, then you're probably not something you should because I can tell you, I did work-life balance for 5 years every week, Paul, which means I had to have a topic and something to talk about or somebody to talk to every single week, 52 weeks, a year for 5 years. That was difficult. And of course, there were some replays. And of course, I got, guests. So I would just riff up whatever their topics are. But it's still a lot of planning and a lot of effort to make sure that came off every week.
And that scares people, right? The planning, right? Oh, gosh, and they may write it down, some ideas, some thoughts. Like you and I, just this morning before we turn on the record, we're on a how-to series. And what Rick and I are doing this season is a little different than normal. What we're doing is we're being sensitive to what's happening in our world and really our listeners and our viewers, some of the needs that you guys have. So we're allowing ourselves to improvise, adapt, and overcome. Okay. If we had an opportunity, like we had the opportunity with Dan Pink, no doubt that was like a no-brainer. Got Dan Pink, how to deal with regrets. Hey, look, that's a topic we all need to talk about. So let's get Dan on and let's have fun with that. So we did this whole thing on podcasting. We know that people like, oh gosh, I always wanted to do a podcast. I just don't know how. But here's the thing. If you get overwhelmed with all the things, I love Rick's comment. Come up with 10 items, come up with a season. And we didn't have initially, when we did this as the Transformational Leader podcast, we weren't really in a season focus, were we? We were just trying to roll with it. We had a season in mind, but we didn't reflect it. I
felt like that was something I brought to the table. I remember sitting down with you and Mike, and we were like, what are we going to do? And I was like, we need to end it, guys. Let's just call season 1 right now. Let's just end it. Yeah. Let's give ourselves a month. We'll come back with Transformational Leader podcast for season 2. Right. But that's when we implemented the seasons at that point. I was like, we got to cut it off so that we have that clean break and then we can do whatever we want to do. If we want to shift, if we want to put people on and off, we can do that.
Yeah. And I think the reason why I remember that and the reason why I think there was some hesitancy on the season part was we're like, well, if we end the season, then we lose inertia, we lose momentum. When will we do season 2, right? How will we continue, right? So we had that kind of apprehension. You talked us off that cliff. You said, no, wait a minute. Don't you need a break? Yeah, I need a break. Don't we want some conclusion to it? And it's the same thing like when you watch TV, right? You always like to see a season finale. You like that. We prefer watching our TV shows in seasons. So, but the overwhelmed part, I know people feel overwhelmed and I just want to encourage you guys, look, just do it, right? You can only possess what you experience. Truth to be understood must be lived. This is an opportunity for you to step forward, experience it. You learn through experience, evaluate those experiences, find somebody else that you can have these dialogues, a cup of coffee kind of podcast. That's what we were doing, really. It's a dialogue. And we'll get to an opportunity to bring others along and be able to have that dialogue. But if you do a mono podcast, which is cool too, you could do a mono podcast where it's just you and you just sharing your thoughts. Those are powerful. And I can give you some tips on how to do that. I have not done a mono podcast. Your work-life balance, you had guests like every single time, right?
No, it was 80% guests and 20% mono. Yeah, it was. Yeah. So, and not only that, but I had to have a stable I'd have a stable of topics ready because I would have guests not show up.
Yeah.
And that happened on my third episode, by the way. My third episode, I'm going into it, and it's the first time somebody didn't show up. So I was lucky enough to pivot. But that taught me, okay, I needed to have a stable of content ready in case that occurred. I had one as well where they lost their internet halfway through. So I just lost my guest halfway through and had to fill the back half of the show, right? So those types of things, you have to get prepared to do. I think the biggest thing to remind people, especially if they're hesitant, coming back to the why, and I want to liken this to something that we've heard John Maxwell, when he's talking about books, and he's like, oh, I want to write a book. And he would say, who's going to read it? And not in a mean way, but like most people say, I want to write a book because they feel they've got a great story to tell. All right, well, that's not why somebody's going to read the book. You got to read the book because there's something you're going to tell them, they're going to teach them, that they're going to learn, or they're going to be inspired by. Like, why are we doing this? What's the point of it? Behind it. So you really just got to make sure that we're doing it for our audience. Yeah. Really understand what the audience is looking for and how we can help.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's important. Audience, absolutely. Figure out who that is. You're not going to try to do a podcast for all the people, right? So think about who that is, who you're trying to target. So important. So audience, important. All right. So let's do a scenario. Let's have fun with this. All right.
Okay.
Let's say Jimmy and Jane want to do a podcast. How do they start? What's the first thing they want to do?
Well, the very first thing I suggest is to get some practice on other people's podcasts so that they can see. And so there's a great app out there, or website out there called Matchmaker. And it's actually, if it wasn't started, it's now owned by the people that do podcast.co, which is where we host ours. But Matchmaker is, if you've got a show or you want to be a guest on a show, it matches people to podcasts. So if you feel like you got a story to tell, you can reach out to several people that have shows already and see if you can get booked. I've done it a few times and gotten on other people's shows. But that's the first thing I think we do. The second thing is to plan out your process, to map out the whole process of how it's going to go. So people don't necessarily always think of pre-show and post-show.
Yeah.
So pre-show, you find your guests or establish your topic, come up with your 10 episodes, and then research. Make sure you've got, facts and things behind it. So again, we're sitting here about podcasts, but when I start busting out, there's 850,000 podcasts, right? You got to have data behind it to help paint the picture, right? Research that's being done. So that's for me, that for pre-show, I think the first thing, establish the name and what the piece is. Like the reason why I chose work-life balance was because I wanted to be able to do a show where I could talk to anybody I wanted to at any time. Yeah. Right. So work-life balance is perfect because I could balance it between work topics and, talking about my kids. Like I could go back and forth and it fit the theme of my show. And I wasn't locked into, like, I have a friend that's locked in. I won't say the name of it, but it's so specific that you can't really pivot and do anything fun with it or have a special episode or a special guest. Like it's just, and again, that's where you want to go. That specificity is great. But I wanted variability. So I named it something that I could do anything with.
Yeah. Yeah. And we picked this name, Breaking Average. It's not just because there's a book that we wrote, but there's a opportunity for all of us to break average. We're picking topics where we realize, you know what, we can break the status quo. We can make a difference. And so, but it's a barn door, Rick. I mean, it's almost like the work-life balance, what you did, right? So we can pick, like if we've got a guest in an area, a subject area that is breaking average, whether it's business or life in general and what they're doing, it's an opportunity for us to bring them in there because we all want to make a difference. And so that's what we're looking at. But I think that's so perfect. So Jimmy or Jane, they're starting their podcast. They do the pre work. They're ready to go. Rick, they've done it. They've mapped out all their topics. Let's talk about the technology. What do they need? And maybe they've had a couple of those things that they've done the guest spots on another podcast, but even before they do that, they need to have the gear. So let's talk about gear.
Sure. And you know what? You don't need a ton of gear. That's the best part is, for me, if you're looking here, the three pieces of gear that I have beyond just the webcam, which I have a Nexigo webcam. I don't have a huge, super, expensive one, but that Nexigo works for me. The most expensive piece of equipment I bought was this microphone. It's the Rode Procaster microphone. To me, it sounds the best. It different range. I started though with a Blue Yeti.
Yeah.
So Blue Yeti is probably the most popular podcast microphone and probably the not most inexpensive, but fairly inexpensive.
Yep.
I think probably around $70, somewhere around there, somewhere $70, $75, somewhere around there. I'm not sure, latest prices. That kind of stuff,
just under 100, I think is where it's at now.
Sure.
Yeah.
But so that's a good one.
Yeah.
That one over time for me was picking up different sounds. So just in my location.
Room.
Yeah. It picks up the whole room. And so I wanted something a little bit more directive. So this Procaster, I want to say was $250. And then I got the boom arm so that for me, I can just push it out of my way. So you have that setup where you move it in front of you, right? You bring the microphone in front of you and push it away.
Yeah.
That boom arm, I could just push up and push down.
Yeah.
Now, when I traveled though, I still have a Yeti. So if I am going to be offsite and I need to be able to still do this, I bring a Yeti with me.
So I'm traveling today, right? And so one of our issues is internet. So we'll talk about that in a second. But I do have a good mic back in the home studio. Here, I'm just using an Audio Technica. I think it costs like $80. It's pretty good. It's better actually than the Yeti.
I was going to say, when you pointed it away, we couldn't hear what you were saying. Exactly. So that's how directive that microphone is.
Now you can hear me. And that's the difference with the Yeti. I had like 3 of them. I use them from dumbbells now. That's my workout system. But all right, look, the problem with the Yeti, they're cool. I love it. And you get it right in front of it and you can quiet the whole room. Fantastic. I recorded a whole book with the Yeti, two books. And the way I had to record that, guys, is I had to go in a walk-in closet with clothes all around because I needed to absorb all the outside noises. I needed those gone because it would pick it all up. So this is just my travel mic. It's not as good as the home mic, but it's not bad.
So so from a technology perspective, recording wise, so again, we're using Zoom.
Yeah.
So from an app or to actually record it, Audacity being a free app is a great one. So when I did Damon Pampolina's podcast, A Tongue Lashing, we recorded all of that on Audacity. So I just went to his house. I brought a couple of my microphones. We just had the laptop set up. Off we went. We're using Zoom. What I actually do for our podcast is I edit ours in video. So I do all the video production that way, and then I just extract the audio. So it's the exact same thing, whether you're listening to the podcast or watching the video. I didn't want it to be 2 different experiences. So I just extract an MP3 and I use VLC, another free app that does that, pulls the MP3 right off of a video production.
Yeah. What's cool is the Audacity that you're talking about, Rick. What you can do, this may even save you a little bit. Here's a little tip for you. When you save the MP4 file for our video here, like today in this podcast, just drop the MP4 in Audacity and it'll pull the audio out for you.
Yeah. I mean, it's 2 clicks for me in VLC. It's the same technology. Yeah.
But it's pretty sweet. So if you do all your edits in the video, what Rick's sharing is, hey, if you do a podcast and you choose to do video, and why not, right? With all the technologies there, you got a camera sitting in your computer, and we'll talk about cameras in a second. You get other cameras you can plug in. Why not? Why not record it video wise? We love Zoom because Zoom, actually, what I do, I actually record the audios as separate tracks. And this is one of the early tricks that I learned, are what's called a double ender. All right. So if you've got, especially if you've got multiple people that are part of a podcast, you want to record those separate audio tracks until you really get your groove. So Rick and I have gotten the groove down, we think. And so we're good now, right? So I, even though I still do the double ender, I still record those little audio tracks. I never give those to Rick. He doesn't need them, right? So he'll just take the video, he'll do what he does with the video, and then he'll extract the audio out. But early on, boy, it was difficult. We were doing stuff in Skype, Ken Tarr and I, and I mean, it worked well, but it wasn't a double ender. We ended up figuring out, okay, we need Audacity on our local end. Like today, here's probably a scenario where Rick and I should be recording locally while we're still recording in Zoom. Why? Because we're in different parts of the world. That's true. We normally are, but my network connection is not the best. So if you notice some max headroom kind of experiences today, watching or listening, that's because of the network stuff. So let's talk about that. What kind of network do you really need to make this thing work?
You need to have the ability to go hardline in. So wherever you set up to do that. So like right now, my Wi-Fi has been great. It's been good for a long time, just knock on wood. I've had it, but I've had those motions where, things, I remember just in the middle, back in the day when it was the four of us, when I first got to the place I'm in now, but I've got a little thing right here that I can run a cable to the hard line real quick if I need to, and just jack in. So even if I'm like mid show, I can pull it off as we're going.
So what I do on my home studio, everything is hardlined in.
Yeah.
I got 3 networks in the house. They all go down to the same pipe eventually, but I just connect in. I just wire in. It makes so much better. I'm not wired in today. I'm relying on the network. I'm using a satellite dish for my internet that's on the side of this house here, that's pointing at a mountain about 4 miles away, that's got a tower there. So I'm relying on that. I got clear line of sight. On a snowy day, it would be worse, but it's as best I can do out here in the middle of Colorado. That's, at 9,000 feet elevation. So
yeah,
but make sure you have a good internet setup if you can. That's so important, especially if you're doing it with others. But here's the good news, guys. If you're doing a solo podcast, guess what? You don't need the internet. You can just do it right on your local machine, right? In fact, you can.
That's right.
You don't even need Zoom. Now, I know a lot of folks will still use Zoom. Let's talk about recording. If you record on Zoom, which I love, in fact, I would say if you're using, there's other tools, right? There's GoToMeeting, there's WebEx, there's Zoom. Some people, I think, try to use Teams. If you're using any of those, if you record locally to your hard drive. Don't do the cloud record. Trust me on that. All right. Because you'll lose some video quality. You'll lose some audio quality. You'll get a better recording if you record local. So thoughts on that, Rick?
No, for sure. And yeah, there's several tools that allow you to, also capture. So I use Cyberlink for all of my stuff, but there's all kind, depending on how fancy you want to get with it. When some of the bigger productions I've done, I use the OBS suite, which allows me to put a green screen behind me, and I put picture in picture, and I can frame out. Literally, I can build a whole framework of shots. So for instance, I can be sitting right here as we're talking about, hit the space bar, and it would shift my camera down and bring up a picture in picture that I've loaded, and then bring my camera back. Like all of that, I can plan out and hit shots and time it that way, depending on how fancy I want to get with the video. But at the same time, I think if I'm just recording something like somebody asks me to do a lead in for them, or somebody wants me to put something that they can throw up on Facebook real quick because to advertise, I'll do that right in Zoom. I'll use Zoom for that.
Yeah. And I will use Zoom too. It's pretty cool. But again, record local. So important. I've made the mistake multiple times. I'll get other, we'll do some, we don't call them podcasts, but we'll do some fireside chats in our work. And I remember early on, I'm like, well, I'll just record to the cloud because I was on somebody else's computer. And I just like, if I put it in the cloud, I know where I can go get it. Well, the problem is it wasn't recording in the gallery mode. And I needed gallery mode. So when you're using Zoom, like Rick and I right now, in fact, early on this podcast, The Breaking Average, and maybe it was the Transformational Leader podcast the season before.
It was Transformational Leader when we weren't doing gallery. Yeah.
Yeah. And
first 2 or 3 episodes.
And you were trying to it was probably just killing you, wasn't it? So with gallery,
it wasn't bad, but yeah, we needed the gallery mode because then, again, I can decide the cuts. So in gallery mode, sometimes there'll be a distraction or or something that I want to cut out, or maybe we paused for whatever reason. I now have that full flexibility that I can cut to the other person, or I can cut to a wide shot or whatever. But when I'm making the cut on the video, you don't notice it. So maybe I'm on a tight shot of you, and then it all of a sudden cuts to gallery. Well, I could have just cut, 9 minutes out of the podcast. Nobody would know based on that cut, right? It's really, there's no jumping at all.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cool. And I think of all the tools, and I've played with all of them, right? I'm talking about the software, the Zooms, the GoToMeetings, all that. Zoom is absolutely 100% hands down the best system that I've experienced. And we've tried some of the more specific. What's the one that we did for our launch for the book, The Breaking Average? I mean,
that was something. Yeah, that was, I can't remember now. It's something I used that like 3 or 4 times for different events because it was an event. We had to let people in and that kind of stuff. I can't remember the name of it. I can't.
And it was cool in terms of setup. We could put out the event, we could invite people, and we could limit the terms of whose camera was on and off and all that stuff. It was great, but it's a lot, right? So keep it simple for you. You guys are doing a podcast, especially if you're just starting, even though there's a lot of other tools out there, some great ones. Hey, Zoom doesn't cost a lot. It's a good system. I like it. If you can use that, if you need something and it's just you, if you got a MacBook, you could probably use the photo booth. That's a really good app. And every computer's got its local software that you can download and use. So that's software. That's recording, a little bit on recording. Anything else that we want to hit on recording though? Just don't want to drop the ball.
Not on recording.
But yeah. So,
but then there's a lot around post.
Yeah, a lot on the post. We want to hit that in a minute. But how long should these podcasts be, Rick?
Average is 45 minutes or less. That's just, if you look, most people's commute throughout a day, going back and forth would be 45 minutes or less.
Yeah.
So, there's that under 30 is your real key for most people for easy consumption. But then again, how much into a topic can you get into sometimes in 30 minutes? So really it's 45 is kind of the sweet spot. 60 is too long.
60 is too long. I agree. So under 60, but I know some folks are thinking, well, gosh, 45, 30, that's still too long. Right now, I know you're thinking that. We used to think that too. But there's still opportunity for those short podcasts too, right? And you can do just we've done little launch kind of podcast where we say, hey, like a little teaser podcast, right?
On Growth Day, Brendan does something called the Daily Fire, and those are 15 or less every day.
Yeah.
That is our largest thing that's consumed on Growth Day, is that piece. And so that's lending us to think that we're going to probably we're going to keep Daily Fire as part of Growth Day, but that podcast in and of itself, right? Basically it's 15 minutes or less every day to kind of get you hyped and going. So if it depends on the medium, but to me, if it's like motivational, if you want to encourage somebody, if you want to get them, you want to do something that's daily or something like that sort, then yeah, that little 10 to 15 minute is perfect.
Yeah. Now, I know a lot of folks, they've gotten the green screen behind them, and obviously Zoom allows you to kind of do a virtual version of it. What's your thoughts on doing green screen or a virtual background?
I think it's personal preference. I think the technology's come so far that it really doesn't matter as much. And again, the only time I use it is if I'm going to use OBS and I'm going to do something with it. So I'm going to bring graphics up, or I want to do something that's a little bit more post-production. But then the other thing I've done is record on the green screen and then do everything else in post, so that I'm in full control of it versus Zoom. Because sometimes you get that fuzzy layer around Zoom, where it doesn't quite pick up, and it becomes distracting, I think. So if you want to do that, if you really want to play with the green screen, the best is still to record on Zoom with the green screen behind you, and then use your whatever app you're going to use to do post-production and pick up the green screen from there.
All right, so let's have some fun. I'm here in Colorado. I'm not in the best location, although I like something real behind me. Or, what I do, you guys, if you've seen this before, you'll see that there's a little backdrop. There's it's like a tarp. It's nice, right? It's something different. It's not virtual, but it's a physical virtual, I guess, but it's not a digital virtual. So here's the thing. Here I am. If I'm going to green screen something, let's have fun with this. All right, here we go. So I'm going to drop in the famous, you'll recognize that. So there it is.
Yeah.
Okay. Now here's the problem with this. So if you're watching this podcast, if you're listening, you're not going to see this. You'll see as I'm moving, there's some herky jerky kind of stuff happening in here, right? Do you see it, Rick?
Yeah.
All right. So if let's say I change it to more of a stage setting, all right, it just doesn't work as well. Like, this is a cool backdrop, but it's not working as well.
Yeah.
So,
and not only that, but like if you look at the bottom right of you right now, where you're getting that little flare off your shoulder.
Yeah. If I bring my arm up, I can make my arm disappear, I think, probably.
Yeah. I mean, it's great technology, but yeah.
Yeah. So, all right.
By the way, too, literally 2 weeks ago, I was standing right where that picture was taken of the Golden Gate Bridge.
Is that right? See,
yeah,
that'd be fun.
Yeah,
we should do a real pod. Hey, when we do our speaker season next year, right? We've got that still on the books, right? We'll do some live. I don't know if we'll do live. Hey, you know what was really cool too? I wanted to hit this as well. I don't want to go off the topic that we're on, but I don't want to forget this. Last week when we did the podcast, we had a live studio audience. We normally don't, but you did a live studio audience every Friday when you did work-life balance, didn't you?
I did. Yep. Yep. And they could come in on Zoom with us.
That was a little pressure, right?
And it made it fun. It made it fun for me. And I mean, you had your standards that would come all the time. So they would comment and throw little jokes or remind me of stuff. That kind of stuff was great. Yeah. So I enjoyed having those people there.
Yeah. And it is kind of fun. That's another twist. Like we did two things. All right. We did a live event so that we could have a real connection with a few folks, but we recorded it. And what folks got a chance to see is how we roll the podcast from top to bottom with no breaks. That's the other thing, right? Trying to piecemeal a podcast together. Oh my gosh, that'll pull your hair out. We've done that before. It's not fun. It's not easy. All right. But we did a podcast from top to bottom, and we brought in a live audience. We used Zoom. We had to limit who was on the their cameras. We had to turn off everybody else's cameras, make sure they're muted. We're kind of rolling the dice a little bit. And we wanted to make sure that only Rick, Dan Pink, and myself were on cam, but it was fun. So we had a chance to really connect with a few folks, record it. Then Rick we're going to talk about post-production here in a minute, takes the video, takes the audio, does his magic there. And then we're ready to push it out. So do you want to talk a little bit about your post-production and then what services you use to distribute your podcasts?
For sure. So my post show, and this isn't quite the post show for us. This was the post show that I would do for work-life balance. But what I would do is, the first thing I would do is edit a little 4 to 5 minute snippet in Audacity, so that I would have, a spot to do that. And then that I could use for social media, right? I'd upload and schedule the show to air. We use podcast.co is the distribution. It's a great, easy interface. It distributes it all through iTunes and Amazon, all that kind of stuff for you, but it centralizes all the statistics for us. So that's why I use podcast.co. I'd upload the show to otter.ai is another app that would do a transcription for me. Then I would take the snippet from Audacity, put that in Headliner is another app. And by the way, this is all on that blog post that I put together, if anybody's going to go back. But I'd go to Headliner, and it would create a video that does the little, sound thing to make that nice. Social media
like
proof.
that.
Yeah.
Headliner.
I then download the transcription from Otter. I'd put the long form transcription into a blog post, and that's for SEO. So the words and that kind of stuff, would pick up. And I would have links to the podcast from there. Then there was a tool called Missing Letter. And it's actually spelled LETTR because there's a missing letter in it, but Missing Letter. That would, I would input my blog page. That would take the blog page and create about 45 social media posts for all different kinds of things off of the blog. So it would automatically post. Some people like it, some people don't, but it's just a way to take something you've already done and distribute. I would then use Stencil to create some social media graphic posts, just to like who it was, what the episode was, that kind of stuff. And then I'd put everything in and click a button and off it would go, right? So that would allow me, off of one piece of content though, have social media posts that would go for, I would do it for the week prior, and then I'd run it for 3 weeks post, right? Just, hey, in case you missed it, kind of those types of things. So I would get a month's worth of social media from the blog post that came from the podcast.
Yeah.
That's how I put everything together.
Yeah. That's cool. Well, first of all, that's a lot of stuff, man. So, and that's good. And you're giving me ideas on what we could do with our podcast, but what's the minimal viable that somebody would should just like, okay, Rick, they may say, Rick, I can't do all those. That's a lot. That's overwhelming to me. What's the one thing that they should do?
Social media, get the name out.
Okay. So
outside of uploading it to podcast.co to distribute it, you've got to let people know it's there.
All right. So upload it to podcast.co or whatever. I mean, there's other systems that are out there.
Yeah. Some people use Stitcher. Some people use, what was the one we were even using prior? Can't remember.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's multiple ones out there, and we'll put a link of a list of those things on the show notes that we're going to put out for this one. And we'll put it actually on the blog. To Rick's point, what we'll do is we'll follow up with this one. We'll put a blog out, say, hey, want to create a podcast? Check out our show. Here's some of the notes. And so we'll have a blog out on this one, and we'll put some of those in there. All right. So you upload it to a service, and they take care of distributing it to all the different channels, right? Spotify, Apple, iTunes, or whatever it's called. All of those, correct?
Correct. Stitcher, right. Amazon, it goes to them all. Yeah.
Goes to them all. So they'll take care of all the heavy work for you. So you don't have to post all those for you. Now the one thing we do that they don't do, but we'll do, is we'll take the video and we'll push it over to YouTube, so that when they get it out and they, to your point, put it on social media, let folks know that, hey, it's out there. And then what's next?
That's it. I mean, in terms of the minimum, but then what you start to learn is some of the quality pieces. So how people search, the fact that if you're going to do a snippet on social media, like the social media post should just be, hey, I've got this, with a link to it. Yeah. But then you start to learn that if you put links directly in, it hurts the algorithm. So you want to put links in the comments. Then you start to learn that if you did a video snippet, there's a lot of people that listen to it muted, so they're not getting it. So you have to learn how to put SRT in transcription, so that if you're watching this snippet on Facebook and it's muted, you can still see what's being said. So doing SRTs. So that's what that in, again, we'll put the link to my step-by-step system that I put together. We'll put a link to that to the show notes as well. But that's why I did each one of those things and I literally could do this in about an hour and a half. So it sounds overwhelming, but once you get used to everything, it would take me about an hour and a half. I used to do work-life balance Friday afternoons live. I'd get up Saturday morning and do this for about an hour and knock it all out before I would go take off my day.
Yeah, that's cool. And it really doesn't matter the length of the podcast, right? That hour or hour and a half, if it was 10 minutes or 45 minutes, it's the same amount of time usually, right?
Yeah. And the longest was creating the snippet. So the longest was finding a good 4 minutes or 5 minutes, 5 minutes or less for social media and really 90 seconds or less, but you want to create a hook that, gets them enough information that they're like, oh, I'm interested in that. But it ends in such a way that they're like, I got to go download that podcast. I want to go hear that.
Yeah.
So we got a lot of good, pieces around that.
Yeah, that's good. All right. So Jimmy and Jane, they got started. They're recording. They're using Zoom. They've posted it to Podcast Co or whatever site that they have. They've put social media out there. But let's say they are doing a video version of the podcast. Let's talk real quick about cameras because we haven't really touched that. All right. What do you reckon? I think you shared earlier, you're just using I forget what kind of camera you've got.
I'm using a Nexigo HD. And the reason for this one is it's got a little ring light right into it. So I have problems with lighting here just because I have, huge monitors. And I've reduced the contrast. It's gotten better, as I've gotten better, but I've got huge monitors up here that provide some natural light here for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I use a Nexigo HD. It's got a ring light in it with 3 different settings.
Yeah. And we can talk about lighting because my lighting is horrible today, guys. So we're showing you real time on lighting, but actually my lighting would be worse.
Really, really fun fact. If you're watching on YouTube or on Empowered Living, the shirts that Paul and I are wearing, the exact same color.
Same color. That's right.
Same color, same manufacturer, same color, bought at the same time.
And
you can see.
Yeah. And here's what freaks me out too, is that when we're recording this, and you can see this, right? I'm mirrored. So it looks like not only is it a different color, even though we know it's the same color, it looks like, wait a minute, my shirt's on one side and yours is on the other. Now you guys watching this will see everything perfect, but it's just the magic of Zoom because it's trying to reflect a vision for you, mirroring what this is my right hand, even though it's really looks like my left hand over there on my screen. So don't get thrown off by your own view. Does that make sense?
Right. That's right.
So I'm not using my laptop camera right now. I'm using a Sony ZV. It's pretty cool. I'm just plugged in though. I'm using the USB capability out of the Sony camera and I'm plugging it in. Why am I doing that? Now, normally I've got a better setup. Actually, I've got a worse setup video wise back home, but it's easy, right? It's just a nice Logitech stream video stream camera. Pretty sweet. This camera here is what, $600-700, and it's okay, right? Obviously, it's still dealing with this, so you don't need a $600 or $700 camera. Just have fun with it. That's the number one thing. I'm getting to my tip and challenge right now. Have fun doing your podcast, whether you go solo or whether you do it like Rick and I do. Just have fun with it. Rick and I have such a great time chatting. We always chat beforehand before we hit the record, and we used to script it. You want to talk about scripting just for a half a minute?
Yeah. I mean, when we had 4 of us doing it, it was kind of necessary to script it out in terms so people weren't jumping in on each other, repeating the same things. But then the downfall of that is people tend to follow the script. So if you go off script or off book, then that throws people.
Yeah.
However, it depends on the type of podcast. Like if this is like you said early on, this is a cup of coffee conversation. That's the way we run it. But if it is informational or if it is got a story behind it, then scripting it is a great thing. And not only that, but just because we record live for 45 minutes doesn't mean that's how it has to be done. the beauty of podcasts and without video is the fact that, you can cut in and cut out and piece it together and get it, perfect of how you wanted to hear that. But yeah, scripting to me though, takes away some of the authenticity of some of the comments or conversations. So I think it only works in like drama, or, you're doing like a true crime podcast or something like that, where you're trying to tell a story.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's different plays, guys, but I'm just encouraging you, just go do it. Have some fun with it. The scripting part, I'll just mention real quick. While we captured thoughts and ideas, so we kind of knew that we weren't talking and hitting the same exact thought or quote or whatever it was. It was more bullet form, I would say, right? We just needed to know sort of points of who's coming in and who's not. And basically, there's a lot of white space there to be able to speak into whatever the topic was or whatever the element of that topic we're getting to. But if you're reading, and I've seen podcasts like this, Rick, I've seen it. You can hear them. They're reading every single word, right?
Yeah.
Please don't do that. Don't do that. I would say just speak from the heart. The topic. It's okay. And you hear today, especially for me, because it's so early, I've got more ums than I probably normally do. And if you've got the ums that are happening, try to eliminate those as best you can, but it's okay. It's all right. You want a natural conversation with somebody. Thoughts on that? Like, do you go in when you do production, do you try to pull out all the ums and ahs and things like that?
If it's audio, yes. If we're doing video, no.
Yeah.
And it's almost impossible to pull that all from video, especially like I do a lot of repeats. Like I'll go, and so I do a lot of repeat words when I start to kick off what I'm about to say. In a audio form, but it's also takes an excruciatingly amount of time to do so. So it's more so how you want to do it. I have one of the podcasts, I won't say who, but one of the podcasts I used to produce, he would do a lot. Right before he would speak, there would be a lot of ticks and that kind of stuff that I would have to take out. So it would take forever to edit one of those. But with us, I think it's just become so natural that we just let them fly.
Yeah. And I'm trying to change here, Rick, just for you. Like, what's going on? I'm just trying to get this lighting off. So
well, you've done your tipping challenge. I'll do mine. And then let's wrap it today.
Yeah.
Mine is going to come back to, again, trying to control pod fade. So if a podcast is something that you want to do, plan your first 10 episodes, do a season, even if you're going to do episodic after that, to where, you may want to do one every week, or that you still want a natural conclusion, so that if some reason it's not going the way you want it to go, you had a natural beginning and conclusion. It's the best tip I can give you. From there, then you can decide what you want to do with season 2, season 3, so on and so forth. But it allows you to have the ability also to change up. So if you started to get into a topic series that maybe wasn't flowing as like you thought it would, then you can end that with a season and pick up another one, and off you go. So that's the biggest one, is if you can't though come up with 10 episodes right out of the gate, then you need to do a little bit more research before you begin the podcast itself.
Yeah, that's good. I like it. Guys, there's a lot of great tips that we've shared here today, and I don't want to just begrudge more, but just do it. Just have fun with it, and share with us what your podcasts are. If you're doing a podcast, we would love to know about it. We want to promote other podcasts. We listen to podcasts. They're a fantastic way. In fact, that's probably one of the best ways to learn. Like, okay, here's some things that I want to change in my podcast. When you hear something, if you hear something that really speaks to you, and the way it was done, the way it was like here, I'm learning lessons today. I did not account for the sun rising the way it did, right through a window that's up there. I'll show you the window, right? That's where all the light's coming in. All right. So for me, I'm going to take that lesson. I'm going to go make some tweaks and changes in the future so that I'm not going to repeat this same mistake. It's okay. I'm learning, but you can listen to other podcasts and learn too. Rick, this has been great. I'm glad we had this discussion, because I love doing these podcasts with you, and I just want to find ways to continue to improve on it. And again, for all our listeners and viewers, if you got a podcast, let us know. Go visit us at breakingaverage.com. Just communicate with us and share about this podcast and the other ones, like the Dan Pink one. we would love for you to share about our podcast. So Rick, last comments from you?
I think that was it, partner. We really appreciate everybody coming along with us, and we'll talk to everyone again next week.
All right. We'll see you.
Thank you for listening to the Breaking Average podcast. If you loved what you heard, please take a moment to subscribe. All opinions and comments expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and do not reflect the opinions or views of any of the advertisers, producers, or platforms. This show was produced by R2 Multimedia. A special thank you to Milestone Melodies for our theme music. As you continue your day, what is one action that you can apply from this podcast to your life? Tune in for our next episode as we continue to challenge everyone to break average.